Richard Feynman's 7 Ways to Master Learning. Many people read a lot of books, take a lot of courses, and take a lot of classes, but after a while they realize they know less than they think. When it comes to explaining things to others or applying them to new situations, their minds start to slip, break, and become fuzzy. Richard Feynman saw this clearly. He didn't believe in rote learning, he didn't believe in studying for a test, and he didn't believe in studying to prove you're smart. He believed in one thing. True learning is understanding the core and being able to explain it in the simplest possible language. From this perspective, there are 7 levels of learning that unlock the mind to become a mastermind, whether you're studying science, language, art, or life. Level 1. Honestly admit, I don't understand it. Learning begins not with being smart, but with being honest about not knowing. Many education systems teach students to be afraid to say, I don't know. But Feynman believed that when you don't dare to admit not knowing, you also close the door to learning. For example, a student remembers a math formula well, but when the teacher asks, why does this formula work, he can't answer. If he dares to say, I remember, but I don't understand yet, that's the first step to real learning. If you can't explain something to a child, then you don't understand it yet. Feynman opposed complex language that hides misunderstanding. He believed that simple language is not a sign of ignorance, but a sign of understanding. For example, you say, electricity is the flow of electrons, but if you ask him to explain it like a child, you can say, electricity is like water flowing in a wire. If you can do that, your understanding will begin to strengthen. Find the unexplained gap. The gap of explanation is a map of what you need to learn more. Learning is not about adding knowledge, but about discovering what you don't understand. For example, when you explain something and say, this is where it gets hard to explain, that's the most important point of learning. Go back to the basics, not to the extras. The core of the idea. When you don't understand, don't memorize, but go back to the basics. Many students think that the problem with not understanding is that you haven't memorized enough. Feynman thinks the opposite. The problem is that you haven't understood the simplest principles. For example, if you don't understand calculus, don't start memorizing new formulas. Go back to the question, what does rate of change mean? Level 5. Connect ideas to real life. Knowledge that doesn't connect to life is dead knowledge. Feynman believed that true understanding occurs when you can see an idea in the real world. For example, studying air pressure leads to ice caps, tires, and airplanes. This connection makes knowledge come alive. Level 6. Teach others and be questioned. Teaching is the most rigorous test of the mind. A good classroom is not one where the teacher talks alone, but where students teach each other. For example, when a student teaches a friend and has to ask, why, that's when his mind was unlocked. Level 7. Accept uncertainty and keep learning. True understanding never ends. Feynman believed that the best learners are those who live in peace with, I could be wrong. For example, a true expert doesn't say, I know it all. They say, from what we know now. This is an open and free mind. The bottom line. In the end, if we look at it clearly, Feynman's 7 levels of learning is not a way to make our brains remember faster. It's a way to transform the way we deal with the unknown. Most education teaches us to fear the unknown, to be afraid of being wrong, to be afraid of asking, and to prefer answers that seem right, even if we don't understand them. But real learning doesn't happen when we have the answers. It happens when we dare to stop, to dare to doubt, to dare to admit, I don't understand yet, and keep asking until the idea becomes our own. Feynman didn't teach us to be the smartest people. He taught us to be the most honest people with our thinking. Honest when we don't understand. Honest when we can't explain. Honest when we find ourselves wrong. Knowledge that cannot be explained is not yet our knowledge. It is still something we borrow from books, from teachers, or from authority. But knowledge that we can explain in simple language, can use, can modify, and can question, that is living knowledge. So, the true value of education is not measured by how much a person remembers, but by how much he dares to ask, how much he dares to think, how many times he dares to say, "I don't know," and how many times he dares to keep learning in a lifetime. Then, learning is not a task, not an exam, not an accumulation of knowledge, but a way of living with free and conscious thinking. Listen to the end of each breath. Richard Feynman's secret to forcing your mind to learn and understand anything. This article is not about forcing your brain to learn with hard discipline, but rather about training your mind so that it can't escape understanding. Educational inspiration for learners of all levels. People don't lack the ability to learn, they lack the way to think. Many people say, "I'm not smart, I can't learn, this subject is too hard." Richard Feynman would disagree with any of these statements, not because he wanted to encourage, but because he saw learning as a matter of thinking, not ability. The human brain doesn't reject learning anything, it just rejects what it doesn't understand, and what it needs to be forced to remember without meaning. So Feynman's secret is not about making the brain stronger, but about putting the brain in a situation where it needs to understand. Feynman's core principle, which most people overlook. Feynman never asked, "Can I remember?" He asked, "How well do I understand?" And there was a rule he believed in. If you really understand, you can't help but remember. If you have to try really hard to remember, you don't understand. This is what separates the average learner from the Feynman learner. Stop fooling yourself into thinking, "I understand." This is the hardest step. The human brain is a master at fooling itself. When we read a book and see similar words, when we hear a teacher explain something and our heads follow along, we say to ourselves, "Oh, I understand." Feynman called it the illusion of understanding. How to break the illusion of understanding. Ask yourself right away, can I explain it without looking at the book? Can I explain it without using technical terms? Can I answer why? If the answer is no, then the learning hasn't even begun. Force the brain to explain, not remember. This is the forcing the Feynman way. Feynman doesn't force the brain to remember, he forces it to explain. Because the brain can remember without understanding, but it can't explain without understanding. How to practice. Take a blank sheet of paper. Write the title, Explain blank, like teaching a child, and start explaining without allowing yourself to use difficult words, without hiding behind formulas. When the brain stops working, that's where real learning begins. Find gaps, not extra information. The biggest mistake most learners make when they don't understand, most people do this: read more, watch more videos, remember more formulas. Feynman did the opposite. He asked, "Where don't I understand?" The gaps in explanation are the clearest map of what needs to be learned. Back to the simplest principles. Feynman had a dangerous habit for wordplay enthusiasts. He would always return to the original questions. What is happening? Why did it have to happen? What would happen without it? True understanding doesn't happen at the highest level. It happens at the simplest level. Connect what you learn to the real world. Feynman couldn't stand learning that was floating in the air. His favorite question? What does it mean in the real world? If you can't connect an idea to objects, phenomena, experiences, everyday life, then the idea remains a dead form. Teach and allow yourself to ask. Teaching was Feynman's secret weapon. When you teach, you can't hide your lack of understanding, because the questions of others will immediately dispel the falsehood. A good classroom is not one where the teacher can't be wrong, but one where everyone can ask questions. Embrace uncertainty and learn like a scientist. Feynman's ultimate secret is this: don't learn to have answers, learn to live with questions. The best learners are not those who are always certain, but those who can say, as far as I understand it now. This is an open mind in a lifelong learning mind. The big takeaway: Richard Feynman didn't show how to make your brain stronger, he showed you how to stop fooling yourself. When you stop being a memorizer and start being an explainer, when you stop being afraid of not knowing and start asking honestly, when you stop studying for a test and start studying to understand, then you don't have to force your brain to learn. It will learn on its own. Before you leave this video, I want you to stop and ask yourself just 3 questions. What do you think you get? Really, can you explain it? How many times have you memorized for a test, but forgotten it when it made sense in real life? And the last question: if today you stopped studying to memorize and started studying to understand, what in your life would change first? Don't answer me, answer yourself. Because real learning doesn't happen in this video. It happens when you turn off the video and start thinking. If this video makes you doubt how you've learned so far, then it has served its purpose. Subscribe, not to watch more videos, but to learn without fooling yourself.